Grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Ghost be with us all evermore. Amen. Amen. So, I mentioned last week that I was going to be shifting some classes around from our syllabus, and I settled on what I would be doing exactly. So, I wanted to pass this around. These are fresh syllabi for you. It's true. I literally just printed it and cut them. What I ended up deciding to do is I took out the class on the discipline of silence because we have our silent retreat coming up. You'll get plenty of practice on that. And then I also took out I'll be combining some of the sacrament prayers, the Mass prayers, things. So that's how we decided to shorten it. And we'll keep the other things as well. So, that brings today to the prayer of recollection, which we'll talk about more at the end of class, but I want to start off this past week. We introduced centering prayer last week, which I hope you found fruitful. Like I said, we're sort of ratcheting up contemplative prayers, beginning really simple and getting more complex as we go. Not more complex, getting more inward, I guess, as we go. But anyway, so how was your experience? Did you get to do it? How did it feel? Did you struggle with anything? What was the effect? So on and so forth. I'd love to hear your experiences.
I feel like there's a lot more small sounds around
Yeah.
than I remember there being in my home.
Yep.
So I struggle with that not being, I know you sort of take it all in and center, but I feel like I struggle to have that not be a distraction. And I think, there was one psalm this week, actually. I don't know, maybe it was a passage from one of the psalms from the offices, and it was talking about like every single iteration of water on the earth. Like he goes through all the different everything that exists in the water and the ecosystem and how it's all coming back to God who supplies the water.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because I feel like I had to sort of pick something like that to think about when I was trying to center in prayer, to sort of have there be a focal point that was connected and not just kind of random thoughts everywhere all over the place.
Yep. So I'm glad that you bring up the distraction issue, which first of all I think is interesting because we haven't gotten to the point where you're focusing on anything yet. So this was just really primarily an awareness exercise. So the point at this point is the distractions. And especially if you're doing this sort of a prayer, I would encourage you to not view the distractions as the distractions, but rather to view the distractions as part of the thing itself. I think that this becomes even more true when we get on towards the prayer of quiet, which is going to be, if you're worried about distractions, that's where distractions really become difficult to deal with. So, but just becoming, I think that just the fact that you develop an awareness to the distractions, I think is important. And then I think it's also a matter of sort of reharnessing those distractions from being distractions in themselves to becoming themselves means of prayer and means of focus. So I think of, I remember being a kid getting snowball fights with my dad, and he'd always have that great move where like it's a perfect throw, like it's straight at his face, and he's just pulls it out of the air and turns it into a throw right back at me. It's always so disappointing as a kid. But I feel like that's kind of what we need to do with distractions in prayer, and especially centering prayer. It's because the point of centering prayer is really just to be present and just to embrace all of it. You're not trying to change anything. You're not trying to change you in that moment even. It's just to practice in somewhat of acceptance. Like this is the state of things. And also, you mentioned that you realized that your house has a lot more sounds than you realized it has. That is centering prayer doing its job, because it is an awareness exercise. and you are teaching yourself how to become aware of everything. We go through our lives tuning out so much, so many different things. There's actually so much going on there that we can actually learn to utilize in our spiritual lives. So even the smallest sounds, God is present in that smallest sound. And so to become aware of even those smallest sounds that we usually ignore is itself a spiritual act, because it can be used as a means of becoming aware of the presence of God.
The trouble is if your mind is a very active mind, then you are immediately a sound becomes a thought, becomes a responsibility, becomes all of a sudden, oh yeah.
Yep.
So I think it is that, like, needing to turn the snowball back around, but
Yeah.
it's easier said than done.
Suddenly you're coming out of your prayer time with a chore list,
Yeah.
which is not very prayerful. Yep, indeed. And that is, oftentimes that's why I like to start people with this sort of prayer on centering prayer, is because you do get to engage with those distractions before they've become distractions. So what's happened there is you've already started the process of meditation. You've become aware that you're doing this, and you're utilizing a means of prayer in a way that it's not supposed to be. So continue that meditation. So take that, and now what can you do about it? And that might be a very personal answer. Like, that may be an answer that you have to come up with in the process of meditating. So, stick with it. Like, go back to centering prayer. Allow those distractions to become distractions. Instead of getting disappointed about it, start interacting with them, having a conversation with them. Say to yourself things like, so what state of the heart is causing me to want to turn these sounds into chores? And so, like, what is that inside of me? And once you find it, then you can begin dealing with it and sort of handing it off to the Lord. And that begins getting into what will eventually become the prayer of quiet that we'll be talking about in 2 weeks. But you're already starting to work on that bit already, which is precisely where that's why I sort of like to start with centering prayer, because it helps us to begin to become aware with the challenges that we're approaching in a more contemplative forms of prayer, before you really get to the heavy lifting, which, like I said, is coming in 2 weeks. Any other thoughts or challenges, Stacy?
Speaking, it was coming to me that my mind is on so many things, and I have so many people knock on my door for prayer that I'm juggling it
Yeah.
in my mind first or in my mind second.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think that is one of the values of centering prayer, is because so many of us, we do have so many anxieties and tasks that we're juggling, and it's all jumbled up in the head. And so we sort of develop these different currents of thought in our mind. And I think one of the values of centering prayer is that it's, in a sense, it's a very practical and tangible form of prayer, because you're not focusing on abstract things, right? You're not focusing on the problems and the anxieties. You're actually it's sort of like going around and touching things, right? It's a very tangible form of prayer. So, like, you're becoming aware of your body and your face and the sounds and everything. And in a sense, it can be a good distraction away from the anxieties. So when you just allow yourself to be present in your space and in your body, it can help to just sort of give you a break from a lot of those anxieties.
I figured out my body is very tense when I say,
Oh, yeah.
Be with me and let me listen to you on what I need to do next. I find that my shoulders are up,
Uh-huh.
Like I'm on a timeline.
Yeah. So there, you're so right. So this is a really, I think this is a really valuable insight, which you can only get from trying to practice this sort of prayer, right? It's only when you practice it that you can realize what sort of roadblocks you're going to run into. But no, that tension that you hold in your body, that's a really important realization, because we humans are a unified whole: mind, body, and soul. Those three things exist together, and they're interrelated to one another. And I feel like, especially in our modern post-Descartes, post-Enlightenment society, we get this sense that our souls are sort of up here and our bodies are down here, and the two don't really interact. It's just they're two completely, and that's not the case. It's not the case at all. And so, yeah, people, in just a really simple day-to-day sense, we take our anxieties that we're holding spiritually, and then we manifest them in our body by sort of the tension that we hold. But, that sort of thing can go even further. Our sins can manifest themselves physically as well. An unhealthy thought life and unhealthy spiritual life can lead to physical problems also. Now, just because you have physical problems doesn't mean that came from sin. Jesus corrects that in the Gospels someplace where, who sinned? Yeah, exactly, this man or his father? Well, said, well, neither, but. But still, recognizing the fact that we are integrated wholes, and I think that is something that, especially as you get into more contemplative forms of prayer, that fact about ourselves, we come face to face with that, and it's something that we, first of all, have to deal with. But second of all, the other thing that contemplative prayer allows you to do is that it allows you to separate out the parts. So by becoming aware of our composition as humans, we're able to actually in that moment begin analyzing it and understanding our inner life and how it's put together and how it works. That can only help you create a healthier spiritual life. And you can see that St. Paul himself has wrestled with this sort of thing. Like when you get into Romans chapters 6 and 7 and 8, you've got Paul wrestling with the inner life. He's like, I feel this tug inside of me, but I also feel this tug inside of me, and this is of the flesh, and this of the spirit, and this of the mind, and what am I to do, right? And you can see that he has taken that time to go into himself and observe and see how all these things are put together. But it's only once you've done that you can do the real work of the spiritual life, which is saying, okay, so this is bad and this is good. So let's start working against this one and for this one. But that's just sort of something that develops as you allow yourself to sort of explore sort of the inner life and contemplative prayer, which is exactly what I wanted to see happening when we started off with this sort of centering prayer that we started off with. Good. Very fruitful conversation. Any other comments or thoughts? How quiet. I love the quiet.
I was just thinking one last little thing that as you were talking, I have a friend who is a therapist, and she was saying, she's a believer as well, but she was saying it's so interesting how often one of the main questions of therapy is how to reconcile mind and emotion and body and those things all together, and how it's such a human dilemma.
Yep.
That's so built into us, but so rarely do we understand how to approach it. So it's interesting that prayer is kind of like the gift of how to approach it, as well as the gift of communing with the Father.
It is how to approach it. And I love that our faith comes with these tools. I also find it fascinating that psychology is discovering some of the things that we've known spiritually for for centuries and centuries and centuries. We have these rich and deep spiritual traditions, which in many ways were doing psychology before psychology was psychology. Because what is contemplative prayer other than getting into ourselves and analyzing ourselves? That's a big part of what contemplative prayer actually is this sort of analysis of mind and thought process and spirit. And of course, what is psychology?
Mindfulness and self-monitoring.
Yeah, I mean, what does psychology mean after all? You know, psyche, spirit, study of the spirit. So yeah, and I think, I also think that this can be, sometimes Christianity is so many different things. Religion in general is so many different things. And I think we've developed this sort of hyper-focus in our culture on what religion is and sort of blocked out all of what it is. So for so many people, I think religion just becomes, about getting into heaven or getting into hell, or it just becomes about morality, or it just becomes about, this or that or the other. But one of the things that Christianity really is it's a deep mystical tradition, and it's not only not only a philosophy but a method of living. It's a way to live your life and a way to engage with your life that is really very fruitful. It's a mystical tradition, and I think that the more that we allow ourselves to see it in its fullness, the better, more of an impact it can have positively on our lives and the lives of others as well.
It's been very personal for me. I've used this for years as an antidepressant.
Oh, really?
I've got a whole book on the mindful way through depression.
Yeah.
And I call it the attitude of gratitude.
Mm.
You're turning on your appreciation. And if I can't think of anything to be thankful for, I just hold my breath until I can think of something.
Yeah.
It's not long before I realize the breath in my lungs, and that brings me right back to God.
Yes.
Practicing presence.
Yeah. And Abby, to go back to what you were talking about with distractions, that's a great way to deal with distractions, to turn them into things to be thankful for. So, that thing comes to you, and you have a choice at that moment to let it spiral off into, your chore list or whatever, or you have the opportunity to say, I see this thing, I recognize it. This is a thing that God's made, and I thank you for it. And just to become thankful of every single little thing you become aware of can be a hugely helpful spiritual practice, and a good thing to do with distractions as well. Stacy?
Contrast having the opportunity and not having the opportunity at the time where you get distracted.
Say that again. I'm not sure that I get your question just yet.
How do you contrast, and I might be saying it wrong because I got no teeth in my mouth, of how to habilitate yourself when you're distracted to try not to be distracted at the same time. Am I saying?
I think I do. How do you, you're basically asking, how do you learn to not be distracted? The answer is practice. It only comes through. I hate to say it, but the answer for every other part of life is the same answer for spiritual life a lot of the time, and that just comes down to practice. You will master the craft by doing it again and again and again and again and again, and not giving up when it gets hard or when it becomes unfruitful. Because before you get good at anything, you will have an unfruitful period. And a lot of people, especially when it comes to something like contemplative prayer, they enjoy the first fruits, then it gets hard. And they say, it's not doing what I wanted it to do anymore, we're done with it. So no, push through that, and let me tell you what, you're going to have an abundance on the other end of pushing through that hard period. And especially with contemplative prayer, the hard period largely looks like distractions. And suddenly you're not getting peace out of it anymore. It's not, it's just, all those different things. Push through it, keep practicing, keep working on it, and then you'll get to the other end of it and you'll have an explosion of fruit at the other end of the season. So yeah, that's it. Practice, practice, practice. And the best way to make sure that you do that, we'll talk about a rule of life at the end of the class. That's our very last class. But what a rule of life does is you decide beforehand what your spiritual practices are, and then you stick to it no matter what, no matter how you feel about it, whether or not you want to do it, no matter how tired you are, you give it the good old college try. And the rule becomes the rule instead of your feelings. That is the best way to make sure that you practice through. When someone's learning an instrument, 30 minutes a day. Just do it. You're not going to like it, but eventually you're going to be playing Beethoven and Bach, and you're going to have these transcendental experiences with just this wonderful, with skill. And that only comes at the end of the practice. It's not the fun answer, but it's the answer. Any other final thoughts before we introduce the next one? Okay, so the next method of prayer, your new homework, is the prayer of recollection. Okay, so this comes from St. Teresa of Avila. And like I said, what we're doing here is we're sort of ratcheting up the contemplative prayer. We start with just breathing, and then we do the centering. Now we actually do something. So we defined last week the difference I've heard between, sort of Eastern and Western forms of meditation is that the Eastern form is about emptying and the Western form is about being filled up. So now we've sort of focused on the emptying, which is the breathing and the centering. Now we get to focus on the filling up. So what I want you to do for this, centering is kind of emptying your mind. Now we start to fill your mind. So what I want you to do for this is start just as we have, all right? I want you to start with a little bit of breathing, do some square breathing, and then do a minute or two of centering. But then from that centering, let your centering turn into something else. And that something else is the Our Father. Pray the Our Father, but don't just blah, 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 all right? Pray it slowly, intentionally, and thoughtfully. Saint Teresa suggests that this recitation of the Our Father should take about an hour.
Once.
An hour once. That's right. So what you're doing is you're taking every single word and every single phrase and you're drawing out all of its possible meanings. This helps with the distraction because in centering prayer, you might feel all of those distractions. But once you get to the Our Father, then the words of the Our Father itself help you to focus yourself. And it's fascinating how many prayers are in the Our Father and how many different applications it can have, how many different meanings are packed into it. I personally think that one of the arguments for God's existence is that the prayer, the Our Father, exists. Because it is so limitless and so eternal once you allow yourself to really enter into it.
In our catechesis class with Father Samuel, we were doing Our Father section of the catechesis, and didn't he say something like St. Teresa had said at one point, like, you haven't begun to understand prayer until you've prayed the Our Father for
That was
12
my
hours?
that was my class, actually. So if you've taken my Christian Foundations course, there's one class near the end where we go through the Our Father, and I basically do an Our Father meditation for the whole class, and it's a good place to start. But it goes, even in that class, it's about a half hour long lecture, and really that's just scratching the surface. And so you just sort of take it word for word. What does Jesus mean when he says Our Father? Right? He doesn't say my Father. He says Our Father. Wow, that's a big thing to think about. And you can tease that out for a little while. If you sit on the word Father, the word Father can go in a billion different directions. And then combine the two. Our Father. And then you you can sit on who for a long while. That God is, that we say who and not what. God is this personal reality. Art, who is. We can get into the concepts of God as being itself, and that's a thing to explore forever. And so you can just, in heaven, Jesus talks about how the kingdom of heaven is in you. You can also think of heaven as in the future, the dwelling place of God. There are so many different directions you can go with every single word as you tease out every single word of the Our Father. And once you've started doing it, it's no surprise that you could take a single recitation of it and stretch it out for a whole entire hour.
Why is it called the prayer of recollection?
Good question. It's called the prayer of recollection because, if you remember last week when we sort of introduced centering prayer, we started it off with just an awareness of ourselves, and then we sort of stepped that out more and more to, just an awareness of our bodies, to awareness of the room, the building, outside the building, and we kind of went further and further. So if you start with that, it's sort of like the spreading out of yourself, and then you pull it all back in for the Our Father. So in a sense, we've got all of our distractions that are out there. Remember we talked about the bees? How contemplative prayer is like bees, and we're the hive, and the bees go out and they buzz and get busy, and at the end of the day you call them all back to the hive to make honey. And that's why it's called recollection, because you're taking all of your busy bees out there and you're recollecting them. You're bringing them all back home. And what you're bringing them back home with is the Our Father. That's the rest at the end of the day. And that's also where the honey's made. So I want you to take everything that we've done so far. Do like a minute of breathing, and then let that lead into like a minute of centering prayer, and then bring it all back with an Our Father. Not just an Our Father, but an elongated long Father, where you're going into every little bit of it and letting that guide your thoughts and your feelings.
I know we're focusing on introspective and stillness and quiet. Is this also something you could do well, like I'm thinking about Brother Lawrence and practicing the present, like while doing like mindless work, like shoveling snow, for example?
Yes. While you're learning each of these different forms of prayer, it's good to keep them separate so that you can learn them in their own right. But once you become conversant with them, they'll all intermix. They all become blah all together, especially as you learn to do it more and more and more. So yes, this is an excellent way. And even if you read Brother Lawrence, he had like a word or a phrase that he would use to bring his mind back to focus. And I find that the Our Father is a good one for that. But once again, we're starting to get into next week's form of prayer. Like I said, they're all intermingled together. One leads to the next, and they're all sort of together. But yes, so I guess it's kind of a yes and a no. Try to leave it its own thing so you can learn it in its own right in the process of learning. But yes, eventually it will begin to influence everything. Is there any other? And so for your homework, do that. We're trying not to extend this out too long. St. Teresa suggests that you haven't really prayed the Our Father until you pray it for a whole hour once through. I think that that's probably a little ambitious for a beginner. So set a timer again. Focus on 5 or 10 minutes of this. It may go longer. It may go shorter. But try to maintain it.
Write a whole book going through the Our Father. Was it Martin Luther who did like the whole book going through the Our Father?
All sorts of them.
Yeah.
There are a lot of those books that are commentaries on the Our Father. Yep.
I love the Our Father, and I believe I know it by heart by now. But is there another prayer as well that's good to say?
Not for this one. Stick with the Our Father.
Okay,
Yep.
okay.
Yep. It is our Lord's Prayer after all.
And a lot of things don't seem right?
I pray it all the time. There's no,
I do too.
there's no time at which it's not appropriate. It's always appropriate. So yeah, like constantly. But this prayer specifically is to go through it slowly, word by word, drawn out. So it's different than just praying it throughout the day. This, you need to come home, get things quiet. Like I said, start with the breathing, then do the centering, and then pull it all back in with a slow, long, intentional, thoughtful recitation of the Our Father, word by word, phrase by phrase, teasing out all of its meanings and all of its thoughts. Okay? And then we'll get into the prayer of quiet next week. Cool? All right. That's that. I'll see all of you in church.